But I do want to welcome all of you. For anybody who doesn't know who I am, other than just getting my random emails, which I appreciate you opening and clicking, my name is Candace Slusher, and I own Slusher Consulting. I've been in non-medical home care and PAS for about the last 16 years. I am a geriatric nurse here in San Antonio since 95. And geriatrics are my favorite. Home care is my favorite. So I'm just so thrilled and lucky and blessed to be able to help some people, to help others, to help our seniors. So, okay, I want to go ahead and be respectful of everyone's time. It is straight up 11 o'clock. So let's get started. So thank you again for being here. Thank you all for taking your brunch or lunchtime to join me today. And I hope you get all the answers you need. So I'm going to go through about 70% of the training that actually comes with the RN Delegation program that I'm selling on my website. So I'm going to ask you to write down your questions and maybe hold until the end, because I'm hoping to answer most of them, but then maybe a 20-30 minute presentation, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A in the little Q&A box there. So you can go ahead and type your questions, but they might be answered. So just be mindful of that. All right, so you want to provide RN delegation and you think, too daunting. What do I do? I'm not even sure where to go from there. Let's see. So in post-COVID, which we're not in yet, but we're going to see so many changes. We've already seen so many changes, and you guys are already working so hard to keep up with the daily demands from the state, from the CDC, from your clients, from your caregiver. Staffing, I know, has been extremely difficult. Unemployment didn't really help that. Fears, I think a lot of people are starting to overcome the fear about it, and we're just looking toward what's going to be our new normal. But I also know that some agencies have not been able to survive in this. And so let's talk a little bit about surviving. Adapting is going to be necessary. So I have up here the definition of resilience. It is defined as the ability to spring back into your normal state after an impact. Elasticity. I always say that I'm rubber, you're glue, right? I'm bouncing right back. I'm back. I've had some hardships and I'm back. But Darwin didn't say only the strong survive. What he actually said was something more like those who survive are the ones who most accurately perceive their environment and adapt to it. So one of the ways that we as home care agencies can adapt is maybe to add a specialty program, a service that sets your agency apart from your competition in your market. So is RN delegation right for your agency? That's a good question. So first of all, I want to say, if you don't have private pay clients, you need to be mindful that Medicaid, PHC, the waiver programs won't pay for this. This is not yet billable. That could be in the future, but it's not yet. And so the biggest benefit if you're primarily PHC is that your clients can stay home a lot longer. So where you may not, be able to provide them with the insulin injections that they need if they're a brittle diabetic or something, without RN delegation, with that, they could stay in their home a lot longer and hopefully thrive and survive a little longer. So that's something you might want to weigh if you have PHC only. But for private pay clients, you can still decide how you want to pass that on, the cost on. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the program. Have your caregivers or providers ever crossed the line? Probably, hopefully, you know about it, you're able to mitigate it. But I know when I was in home care, before we started our RN delegation program in 2012, I was regularly, things would come to my attention and I would just sort of cross my fingers and know that we're doing the right thing for the client, but that it wasn't 100% right. And of course, I got caught, because I always get caught, which is how we ended up developing this RN delegation program. And the surveyors were always very happy with it. Actually, passed the surveys 100%, especially in regard to RN delegation. So if you've stressed out about bending the rules, this might be right for your agency. Have you ever lost a client, or maybe lost a referral because you couldn't provide something that RN delegation allows you to do, like administration of medication or blood glucose monitoring, insulin, things like that? And do you want more hospice and home health referrals? This is huge for hospice, especially those who are coming in. They know that their clients are going to be at end of life, obviously, and they would love to partner with an agency who can help the family through every aspect of that. You know, how much good are you really able to do a client whenever, you know, you're helping the wife, you're there for her respite, but you have to wake her up in the middle of the night to give the medication when he's in pain, you know, for her husband. So I just think this is a really great program for that. So RN delegation basics. The client must have a stable condition. So if they have maybe a feeding tube or some wound care and they've had regular infections and it's not yet sort of stabilized and begun maybe a healing process, then the RN themselves will maybe have to make that determination of how stable is this client? Is this really safe enough for us to still provide this care in a home setting without nursing? There also needs to be a responsible adult, and that could be the client, but there needs to be somebody who is alert and oriented and able to direct care and report changes. So if you have a dementia client who lives alone and there's nobody who can step up, even if it's maybe an aging life care professional or what we used to call geriatric care manager or some sort of guardian or representative, then this may not be delegable. The registered nurse that you choose should have a very clear understanding of the Nurse Practice Act, because this is on them, okay? The onus of whether or not these caregivers can or cannot perform these duties is on the RN. They have to sign off with their license that they agree that they have taught this caregiver what to do and that they have returned demonstration and that they are competent, that if they don't know something that they'll call, you know, all of these things fall back on your nurse. So you want not just any RN, you want somebody who is comfortable enough with teaching, can work with your family members a little bit, can be a little bit flexible to work with your schedulers, and that's confident and comfortable with their own skills. If you're worried about where to find an RN, because that can be tough, I'd say start with some of your connections. The assisted livings and a lot of or at least the licensed personal care homes use RN delegation so that their staff can give medications on the floor. So that's a good place to start if you have connections there, but also social media groups. I know in San Antonio, there's a San Antonio nurses Facebook group, and I found the last RN that I used there, and it was very successful. And then you need to know that the registered nurse has to be your employee or your contractor. So you cannot use the hospice nurse who's already in the house and has already met your caregivers, and that would be convenient, but that doesn't work. The hospice nurse cannot be the one to delegate to your staff unless you contact that hospice nurse and contract with them. There is actually a contract included in that packet, so you don't have to come up with something. So which tasks are delegable? Very specifically, any medication administration except for IV or intramuscular injections. But let's just go through them. Oral, topical, ear drops, eye drops. Looks like no, I did. Nose sprays, inhalants like inhalers, nebulizers, even oxygen if it's ordered. Sublingual medications and subcutaneous injections. Like insulin, as long as it's with a dial pen. You could even do maybe Lovenox or something, as long as it's with a dial pen and there's a specific order. And then, of course, any kind of suppository. This does include narcotics, again, as long as your RN is comfortable with that. So you want to see the medication packet that comes in the program. All medications do have to be pre-dosed. So the dial pen technically counts because your caregiver is not having to draw it up and measure, you know, within an insulin syringe. They just dial 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the number is. So that does make a big difference. But liquid morphine and Ativan, things like that, would need to be pre-drawn in dosed syringes, which the hospice nurse could do whenever they, you know, make their weekly visit to fill pill boxes or something. This does not allow you, this isn't written in here, but RN delegation, if you do not have a home health license along with your PAS, does not allow you to fill pill boxes. Still, without a home health license, you can't do it, even with having a contracted RN. So please be aware of that. PRNs can be a little touchy because the caregiver cannot be the one who makes the decision. So if the client is alert and able enough to say, I would like a pain medication, or if the caregiver sees that the client is visibly in pain and would like, the caregiver can say, do you need pain medication? And they can answer, that's fine. But if the client is maybe because they're already medicated or they have dementia of some sort, if they can't make the decision, then the caregiver can't just say, well, I can see she's in pain, I know it's time to take it. So they need to call the hospice nurse or a family member, or that's where that responsible adult could come in to say, it's okay to go ahead and give it. And then they would just document that. Non-sterile dressing changes, not first aid, but something that requires a prescription. I mean, first aid you can do anyway, but you don't need RN delegation for it. Feeding tubes. Now, any sort of peg tube feeding and medication administration can be done without RN delegation. So if you've gone through those extra measures, bully for you. But if you haven't, because it sounds complicated, it is. And I would just umbrella that in with your RN delegation program if that's what you decide you're going to do. Blood sugar monitoring and insulin injections are fine. Sliding scale is okay, but only with a dial pen and as long as everything is clearly written down and directed. Vital signs do not need to be delegated, but it could be wise to at least do an initial instruction with your RN, especially if they're requiring a manual cuff, because not everybody knows how to use that, or if maybe you're holding a medication because the blood pressure is too low, or you're giving it only if it's too high. You may just want to make sure you're doing some extra education there, but it's not necessarily needs to be delegated. And then catheter care, really, if you're changing the bag, that is a clean procedure in medical terms. If you're only emptying the bag and you're not having to change it like from a day bag to a night bag, shouldn't be a big deal. And an in and out catheter is delegable, but that's up to your RN and how confident they are with their skills in teaching and monitoring, doing catheterization. Client considerations. So when does a client need RN delegation? That's the big question. A lot of times, you may bring it up with them and you think they won't need it, but if you know you have a client that already has maybe mid stages congestive heart failure and down the road, based on what you know, they're going to end up on hospice and they're going to need more medications, you may want to go ahead and broach it with them. Do you already have clients needing delegation? Quite likely. Maybe they're already providing some of these services just because hand over hand is a great theory. But most of my clients, they're not really going to hold the bottle and then allow you to just help them steady their hand. They're going to just take their hand down and allow your caregiver to do it because it's easier for them. It's faster. We got to do these eye drops and get on with our day. But that is crossing that line. Same thing with inhalers. If the caregiver is squeezing the inhaler, they're crossing the line. So most agencies, if you really look, probably have a small percentage of people who already need it. And are families frustrated maybe that you're not able to provide those things? Maybe they're frustrated that they have to go do the nebulizer, or home health is trying to teach the family to do the wound care so they can pull out and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of different factors there. And then is the client delegable, which we talked about. The criteria are that all the tasks have to be non-sterile. There has to be available orders so that the RN can read them or speak with the doctor or the hospice or home health nurse. Hopefully there's some other hospice or home health, at least initially when you're starting an RN delegation program, just to help coordinate so that your contracted RN doesn't have to be the one to call the doctor. But for medications, the prescription on the bottle is technically a good enough order for an RN to be able to use that at home. I hope that made sense. What the client needs to understand is that the nurse is going to come in and out. There'll be a little bit of a revolving door. So a 24/7 client in these days of overtime has maybe 4 to 6 caregivers. And so each of those caregivers has to be delegated for the tasks that they're responsible for, not only on their own shift, but say the medications only need to be given on the night shift. But what if the day shift person has to stay over a little bit because somebody's late? So really everybody on the team should be delegated. That's just helpful. Administration, excuse me. First of all, you definitely need to add this to your QAPI program just for oversight and so that you can double check your systems. Everybody's getting everything they need whenever you do your normal QAPI, definitely before the next survey. You want to add it to your marketing materials as a higher tier of service and include it in in the program is actually a sample brochure insert that you could use. You're going to want to add it to your consents, to your service and your billing, or if it's all in one, there's actually a sample statement in the packet, just saying that I understand that this RN delegation would cost this much more. And again, we'll talk about the ways to bill in a little bit. And you're going to want to add it to your ISP as a task. So I wouldn't say if a client has eye drops and needs their medications crushed, maybe to be taken with pudding, and an inhaler, I wouldn't put each one of those separately. I would just put RN delegated tasks as a check for your caregivers to be able to sign off that they did that, because then you're going to explain what those are within your care plan in detail. And there's some additional documentation that comes with it that can be left in the home for caregivers to refer back to. That covers you actually for the state. They don't need to see each little thing that they do. And then your office and your RN need a clinical procedure manual. So you can buy just one and make copies, but you need to be able to show a central reference as to this book. This describes the technique and procedures that we do for each different task. And that needs to be universal so that you and the nurse are doing the same thing, understanding the same thing. So for staffing, your staffing coordinators need to be able to coordinate the initial training schedule with the RN and the multiple caregivers. Ideally, you'd love to be able to reduce the visits so that you don't, for those 6 caregivers for a 24/7 client, you don't have to go, the RN doesn't have to go 6 different times. It's more cost effective if you can get 2 to 3 caregivers there at a time to train, or at least do it on shift change so that they can get 2 people at the same time. That's just less stress on the client, because it is a little stressful for a while to have so many people coming in and out. It can be kind of confusing and overwhelming. For on-call, you need a system that triggers your on-call to know when an RN delegated client needs to be, if they have to be restaffed, what do you do for fill-in caregivers? So a few different options would be, I actually would recommend that you delegate your on-call person, so that worst case scenario, they can go do the RN delegated task and then staff the rest of the shift with whoever's available. Because a lot of times that's where you are, especially on nights, weekends, and holidays. But then the on-call person also needs to have the contact information for the RN in case that there isn't a problem after hours or something comes up, maybe with even a new client who's requiring RN delegation. So this is a team effort. Your whole staff in your office needs to understand how this program works and what to do with it and what their part is. And then also just know that RN delegation clients are automatically going to require your highest skilled, sharpest caregivers. And the RN needs to be able to tell you no. So if you've staffed maybe a subpar caregiver with a group of really great gals, and she just can't quite grasp the concept, or she's not able to return demonstrate, and the RN calls you and says, hey, Susie such and such is not going to work. She can't handle these tasks. She's overwhelmed by it, or she doesn't understand. You're going to have to restaff it and respect that, because it's the RN's license. So she's not going to sign off on somebody who's not 100%. Okay. Caregiver considerations. So you definitely want to add some RN delegation training to orientation. Now, that is not specific training for each task or client, but just so that they understand 100% what they cannot do for clients and what the consequences are for crossing those lines. And they need to understand primarily that each client is different. So RN delegation is specific to each client. So just because you learn to do the nebulizers for Mr. Jones doesn't mean that when you get to Smith, you can say, oh, I already know how to do nebulizers. I learned it from Mr. Jones. Every client is different. So they have to be delegated separately for each client for each task. Okay. In each case, and this is a trigger, be sure to address if the family needs RN delegation but doesn't agree. So they might say, oh, no, it's fine. I'll keep going by and doing dad's nebulizers before work. But after a while, the client can get, the family member gets comfortable, or something happens and she calls and asks the caregiver, just this once, just between you and me, can you please do dad's nebulizer this morning? I won't tell. And before you know it, they know the caregiver can do it and they stop going to do it. And your caregiver's crossed this line, been sort of bullied or persuaded to do that. They're uncomfortable and you're at risk for being in big trouble. And a lot of times the clients had best intentions to try to save money if there's an extra cost, but it doesn't matter. And rules are rules. And that's why we're here talking about that today. So just be mindful and always give your caregivers a heads up. So there's a nebulizer here and the daughter says she's going to do it. If she asks you to do it, you call me. Done. Okay. So RNs, you can certainly hire an RN. There's never going to be full-time work in this realm for that, but it just depends on how you want to do your own structure. Just remember that with a contractor, that they are allowed to keep their own schedule. So you may want to have a backup plan, maybe a second RN. So maybe one of them is available in the evenings, Monday through Friday, and on the weekends, and the other one's available during the day because, you know, she works contract for somebody else. So that's gonna take a little bit of coordination. And there may be times when you have to say to the family, okay, so we're gonna start care with your dad and he is gonna need RN delegation, but it's gonna take my contractor a few days to get out there. So I need your family to continue to do the medications until we can get everybody trained. And typically, as long as you're on the up and up with them about that, they're pretty understanding. So follow your agency policy for contractors though. You do need to keep a compliant file for your RN contractor. Make sure that you're running her license every year and doing everything that you would do for a contractor file, usually pretty similar to an employee file. And they may set their own price. So I've seen between $65 and $90 an hour. Some of them charge for travel time both ways. Some only charge one way for documentation time and for the time they actually spend with the client. So typically an average, I think you could tell a family to expect for a 24/7 client, maybe $400 to $500 within the first couple of weeks to get everybody trained and ready to go. And then after that, they do have to do supervisory visits at least every 90 days, but that is something that they determine upon assessment. And all of that information is included in the packet, included in the assessment form, so that the RN will determine how frequently they need to be delegated. And there are specifics for insulin injections. So they need frequent supervision for the first month. Then they can determine how stable the client is and how often they need to supervise. Documentation. Okay. So have a lot of forms included in the packet. It's almost 30 pages, I think, but they're not all forms. But there is an assessment form. And the one that I have it's for the initial assessment, and then it's just ongoing. So I've always just kept an electronic file, and the RN just uses the same form, updates it, adds more narratives, sends it to you, and you just save and replace the same one so that you're not going through, 30 different documents when the state wants to come and survey you about it. And the RN delegation supervisory visit form is there. Information form to keep in the client's home folder so that the caregivers can refer back to it, so family members can see what's going on. And then there's, of course, a medication list, a PRN medication, like a narcotics log. And then feeding tube training is all included with that because there is some extra steps. They need to go through some material and take a little test and do return demonstration when it comes to PEG tubes. And then you're going to want to set a system reminder for RN supervisory visits that's similar to whatever system you use to trigger your own supervisory visits, because even though the RN should be keeping up, hopefully the onus comes back on the agency as to whether or not those supervisory visits are in compliance with the plan that they set up. And then the last thing is you may want to add whether RN delegation is needed in your agency supervisory visit, just because they may not have needed RN delegation when they first started on, but when you go out and do supervisory visits, you may find that, well, she was doing her own inhalers before, and now with her arthritis, her dexterity is worse and she can't quite squeeze it. And so now she needs RN delegation. So that's a good way to keep on top of that, is just to add it to your supervisory checklist. Compliance and survey. Okay. You're going to want to include RN delegation as a column in your client list moving forward, just so that they know what you're doing and you're on top of it. The state has been looking for people who are crossing that line, but again, just keeping everything on the up and up. And then be aware that if you have 4 clients who are getting RN delegation, all 4 of those are going to be on that list of client files that they want to review, and possibly of clients that they want to visit. So just be mindful of that. They're going to check on you. There's no way around it, but they are, again, this system that I'm selling has passed through survey 4 different times. They've been very happy with it. So, and then I just say, know your RN delegation policies. The packet does come with policies. you can just slip right in. I would create a separate RN delegation book, say these are all the things that we're doing. But you want to know your policies, and they want to know that it's done correctly. Billing. So I would determine how you want to charge for RN delegation. Just maybe sit down with, if you're the owner, or sit down with the owner and say, okay, what's the easiest way, or what's the best way we want to do this? So you could do a pass-through expense. The RN sends you an invoice. Maybe you put a copy of that invoice, make it a line item on your invoice. Bill it like it's a receipt or a parking pass or something. Or you could do a higher, what I call a blended rate, so that maybe $21 an hour is your base rate. But if you require RN delegation, we're going to do, $23 or $24.50 or something, depending on how much RN delegation you think they're going to need, so that you can cover your costs. But then that way, they don't feel like they're being nickel and dimed. It may be a higher perceived value. So you're just going to want to see how you are comfortable working and wording that. And then you do need to remember, though, that you have to pay the RN yourself. So the client cannot pay that invoice separately, because they are your contractor or possibly your employee. All right, what do you get with the program? As I've mentioned, you get the RN contract so that it's already worded for you. There's the delegation policy, as well as the client collaboration policy in regard to delegation to unlicensed personnel. There is the RN delegation assessment, which is very comprehensive. It's about 4 pages, but it's easy to use. So it covers each different category of what could be delegated. There's an area to write in what the order is, the frequency, and all those kinds of things. It's a very user-friendly form. And then the RN delegation supervisory visit, a medication schedule and a PRN log, the home folder documentation, policies on medication supervision, so that you do have that, because technically you're supervising medications at that point, even if you weren't before. And then the policy and training on feeding tubes, which is pretty extensive. And then there's an RN delegation rules poster, which I'd be happy to send to you anyway, if you just wanted to see that. You may be able to find it online, but it is the TAC 225. Pardon me again. There is a sample letter for rolling it out to clients if you needed some help with marketing that. Because, once a client is already in a groove of what their bill is every month, it can be a little bit difficult to have that conversation and say, well, now we're going to give you more care and better care, but we are going to charge you more for it. So that's important to know. But there is a good rollout letter. It's a decent sample that you could, of course, fix. And then the sample brochure insert for marketing, so that you're not having to reprint your brochures immediately. And then there's all these. So I'm giving you about 2/3 of the slides here, but there's a couple of more slides with a little more detail that come with the program. And then once you purchase the program and gone through everything with your team, if you have some questions, I can give you I'm offering a 30-minute Zoom meeting to just with your team, so that y'all can just spitfire some questions and say, I want to make sure I'm doing this right. Do I understand this clearly? Again, because it is a team effort. And then the whole packet is the PDF fillable. So it's easy to customize. You only have to put in the name of your agency once, fills out the whole thing for you. And it's a pretty user-friendly. I've had a few people already purchase it and been real happy. I haven't actually had a lot of questions, but I am happy to answer them. And then as far as how you purchase the program, just go to the website. It's slusherconsulting.com.